Sam Seder on the Majority Report. It is a pleasure to welcome back to the program Dave Weigel. He is the national correspondent, political correspondent for Semaphor. Dave, Emma is sick today, so she's going to miss this, sadly. But as national political correspondent, what time were you on an airplane last night?
So I actually left Iowa before the caucuses were over, and yet I was a little bit pompous about the decision by every network to call this while people were still voting. We have had pretty decisive Iowa caucus results before, but nobody doubted that Trump was going to win this thing. And the bet that we made at Semaphor is we had some folks in Iowa. I came here to get set up and explain what was going to happen in New Hampshire, because really had Nikki Haley come in a huge surging second, people been surprised by that. That would have been a story for New Hampshire. Had what happened in reality, which is DeSantis coming in a poor second, but ahead of Haley, that's also going to affect New Hampshire. I mean, as I'm talking to you, DeSantis's message is, I'm going to commit to both debates in the state, and it's time for Haley to do the same thing. So I knew it would get messy, but I knew it would get messy in New Hampshire, not Iowa.
Now, my experience has always been that the story is always that Iowa, impacts New Hampshire, but it seems like that's not the case. I mean, and maybe you do this. You're a professional at this, so you would have a better sense. But in my recollection, it's not really predictive. I mean, in terms of what happens in New Hampshire, is that generally true?
It isn't, but I can get into the reason why it isn't, and then the reason why it was interesting. Sorry. It isn't predictive. So Iowa is one of the last caucuses, really. A lot of states have given up on these things and gone to primaries. So it is a more engaged electorate. There's not as many people who are just fair weather. Oh, there's a primary I saw on TV, I'm going to go vote today, or send a mail-in ballot. It's a more intense group of people. It's a more religious electorate. Although lower this year, is about 51% evangelicals, down from 2/3 in 2016. It doesn't look like New Hampshire very much. New Hampshire is much more secular. New Hampshire, the plurality of voters are not registered with a party, which means they can show up and vote for either party in a primary. And that leads to, for John McCain or for Mitt Romney in 2012, the candidate who seems less right-wing often benefits. So that's the difference. What we learned in Iowa, though, is that Trump's movement is better at turning people out than the other candidates are, and the suburbs and the kind of college-educated voters who could make Nikki Haley competitive, they really didn't turn out very much in Iowa. She did not have something that looked like it was happening if you were only spending your time in Iowa City or in Des Moines. She did well enough to win one county by one vote, Johnson County, where the University of Iowa is. But if you compare, maybe we'll get more into this, but if you compare the results 2016 and even 2012, there were more white working class voters in rural counties turning out relatively than voters in the suburbs. And that's, if there is a path to beat Trump in New Hampshire, you're going to get a lot of suburban voters who maybe voted Republican all the way until Trump came along and then became Clinton and Biden voters. You want them to turn out and vote for Haley, and they really didn't in Iowa. It was pretty paltry. I mean, I mentioned Johnson County. That's where the University of Iowa is, Iowa City. It's grown a lot since 2012. It's added 20,000 people. If you have not been there, you can imagine what a college town looks like and who votes there. From 2012 to 2024, 1,000 fewer Republicans turned out in those caucuses. So,
wow.
What if that happens in New Hampshire? You could say this race is over already. If this happens in New Hampshire and people, even in kind of liberal suburban towns, do not bother voting for Haley, it's very much over.
Okay. All right. So there's two ways to assess this in terms of, let's leave that, like what happens forward in a minute. And, is there any way, I mean, my understanding is that the weather was really bad. That's what everybody was saying on television.
It really was.
Bad. But they got almost like not even 2/3. It seemed like they had 60% of the turnout that they had in 2016 come out, which is surprising to me. I mean, unless the weather was that bad, I guess. But you say there was less evangelicals that came out. And I wonder, like, putting aside the dynamics of the Republican race, because I think the big thing to come out of it is that, like, Donald Trump won sort of times two insofar as he not only won Iowa, but he also sort of ensured that there wasn't going to be a single candidate against him coming out of Iowa, and that the race was going to go for another 4 or 5 primaries at least. But with that said, is there anything to be garnered from this turnout and the nature of the turnout as to, like, measure Republican enthusiasm or whether people are turning out? Like, when you tell me that people in the suburbs weren't bothering to come out, even for Haley, it sounds to me like Republican suburban voters don't think there's any way to stop Trump, and they're just not that interested.
That was the case in Iowa. And if you were not, you saw a report on polling in the state about how Trump was up 25 to 30 points. And if you cared enough to go see Vivek or DeSantis in person, they would tell you that the polls are fake and wrong, yada, yada. But they weren't. I mean, people got the sense that nobody was getting a lot of traction against Trump. You probably found this in real life. If you talk to somebody who's not following the primary that closely, they hear about Trump. They don't know a lot about the other candidates. So there is more of a sense of competition in New Hampshire. There is a belief here that it is close. The polling says it is. High single digit race at the best, with Trump ahead, Nikki Haley behind, and Chris Christie dropped out. So the assumption is, I think not crazy, that Chris Christie's voters who cannot stand Trump, that was the entire point of the Chris Christie campaign, might say, okay, Haley looks like she can beat her. This happens in New Hampshire. There are tens of thousands of voters who didn't know who Amy Klobuchar was, and then she came 5th in Iowa, but she had a speech pretty early in it sounds like I'm being patronizing, but like she had a speech early on caucus night. She got some buzz. She came to New Hampshire. Within a week, she was a credible candidate who came a very good 3rd place in New Hampshire. So things can move here. That's the idea. But you're right. If you were talking to Republicans, as I was 2 days before the caucuses, hours before the caucuses, the scenario they wanted was Trump under 50%, Haley in 2nd%. Therefore, they can go ahead and have a 2-person race here. It didn't happen. I think it'd be easier to put that together in New Hampshire. I do think the weather affected things. I will say, though, when I was gassing up my car before I left, it was at a Come and Go, one of the beautifully named Iowa gas station chains. There's nothing funny about. And the guy next to me got out of his car in negative 18 weather, wearing shorts, sneakers, and like a thin Patagonia puffy jacket. Not one of the big ones, not one of the Canada Goose ones where you look like you're on the surface of the moon. Yeah, but he came from working out, walked into negative 20-degree weather, got some stuff at the gas station pumped, and I didn't see him, shivering or anything. So the Iowans had the ability to go out into this if they wanted. Also, the caucuses are not outside; they were inside where there were heaters. Right. So you just didn't see. I think you get more of a sense in New Hampshire that people think we can actually make a difference. It's warmer. I mean, it's 25 degrees, which felt like South Beach to me today. But you saw there are huge limits to that, and there's just not that many people who vote in a Republican primary who think they can slow Trump down. Not right now.
How disaffected are those people? Did you get a sense of that? I mean, I got somebody on the IM saying Iowa is just like bad weather doesn't even do it justice. But I mean, did you get the sense? Did you get the sense that, let's say it was, I mean, and I don't know how you predict this. I don't know how you assess this, but I'll ask you anyways. If it was, 25 degrees in Iowa or 30 degrees, to lose 40% of the attendance from 2016, I mean, I could see the weather doing 25% and then maybe 10% going like, it's in the bag anyways. But if you think it's in the bag anyways, you would probably be either you would be pretty polarized about Trump, I would imagine. And you would be like, we've got to stop him. And I'm going to do it anyways. I mean, that just seems like a big drop off to me.
Yeah, it does. The Haley campaign, any reporter who covers it will tell you, is just not very open about its strategy. Even if you get them talking on background off the record, they really don't want to say how they were targeting, what their universe was. this might be an indictment of reporters that we should know more. But my point being that they're not very talkative about what they were trying to do and what they couldn't do. And no campaign was admitting, oh, we actually had all this stuff planned and we had to cancel it. They were confident that they had DeSantis and Trump, and from Haley, it was sort of Americans' Prosperity, the Koch group's ground game. They said, okay, we've done enough where people are aware, and we're calling them, and they can come out. They had all contacted more than enough voters to push that up. So hypothetically, had it been a 40-degree day, could more people have come out to vote for Haley? I think so, but I think more people could have come out to vote for Trump. I mean, one thing I'm including in our analysis as it goes up is if you look at, I looked at the counties that Trump flipped from Obama. They went for Obama in 2012. They went for Trump in 2016, then he won them again in 2020. He didn't win them all in the caucuses in 2016, but those are the places where it's okay. White guys without college degrees, working class, those people weren't necessarily Republicans, and now they like Trump. In those, the turnout was still down from 2016, but it was down by less than the rest of the state compared to 2012, which was a similar turnout, like 120,000 people. This is going to be like 112. Compared to 2012, turnout in those counties was up. I mean, there were hundreds more people voting. And it was way down, I was saying before, down big around Des Moines, down big around Cedar Rapids, just the places. So if you extrapolate, who would have come out if it was warmer? I can see if all the votes lifted, there just were more people interested in supporting Trump again than interested in supporting Haley. And I should add, because I'm not trying to spin just for DeSantis here. This is the DeSantis campaign that points this out the most, that by the end, between AFP and her super PAC and all those groups supporting her, she was on the air more than anybody else. You saw Nikki Haley's ads and her message. And she's going to end up with half as many votes as Marco Rubio got when he lost to Trump in 2016. I mean, the energy was not there, and not enough to power through bad weather. But even I think with good weather, I've seen campaigns that were clicking. I mean, the thing I can add to this, as being from the ground there, I was comparing my notes from 8 years ago and from 12 years ago, which were harder to find, about who had what crowds. And the final days in 2012, you could see Santorum events where people were packed out the door, hundreds of people. In the final days of 2016, you could see Rubio's crowds. He'd be in a suburb and get 350 people. Haley was getting in the same places 90 people or so. That, I think, was shrunk by the weather. I'm pretty confident more people would have made the trip if they could, if it wasn't so cold. But I remember covering Barack Obama in 2008, and he'd have to delay events because the crowds were so big that they couldn't pack everybody into them on time. They would have to delay by half an hour. That's just not happening. There's just not the same enthusiasm for these candidates as much as they could see it in Iowa. It just wasn't there.
And is it worth trying to extrapolate to the general from that, or is that just a fool's errand?
It would be awesome if you could extrapolate from one Iowa caucus, so I could go home. Why do I want to go home? I'm going to have a fun time here.
Come on, you're having fun. Stop it. My understanding is that come and goes. My understanding that come and goes are actually spelled K-U-M and G-O. Is that correct?
Yes, you don't have to censor them when you go with them, and they're great. I mean, Iowa gas stations are great. If you've never been there, but I do think from talking to Democrats, they did notice that in 2016, Democrats kind of slept on the fact that not all of them, but if you were talking to the Hillary campaign, you'd say, hey, it looks like 40,000 more Republicans turned out in this race, and they all went for Trump. And they'd say, well, he gets the general, yada, yada. For every 2 Trump voters in a rural, for every Trump voter who leaves us, we'll get 2 in the suburbs, that kind of thing. And this is not that. This is with no Democratic race really on the other side. There's just not the same enthusiasm for Trump. That makes sense, I think, not just to Democratic strategists, but to me, because if you look at polling where Trump is doing well, he is a well-known quantity who's not popular. The polling is a reflection of people thinking Biden is old, Biden is presiding over an economy that feels like it was better 4 years ago. I guess Trump, sure. And if you add Kennedy as an option, Kennedy who's most people are not seeing in their lives, and if they do see him, it's usually him saying something like, what was it the other day, that the FBI was right to wiretap him.
He did say that it was okay,
yeah.
That they did, but that is his father and uncle were doing it as a check on the FBI,
right,
in some way.
Yeah. Knowing from the inside. I mean, for example, that's not probably the kitchen table issue everyone's talking about at home, but that's how Democrats see it. Is okay. Obviously, a lot of people are frustrated and they don't like their choices, so they're TBD Trump right now. I think that there's more evidence for that from Iowa. You were not seeing the MAGA movement surge back. You were seeing how it's the biggest thing in the Republican Party, but it's not what it was in 2020. It has lost support in 2020. And the exit poll that everyone focused on, I think correctly, result that people focused on was when you ask even Republican caucus goers if they wouldn't vote for Trump if he was convicted, it was about a third say yes. Now, will that change over time? Because there was much. You could find Republicans who said if he was indicted, he should drop out, and he didn't, and they just stopped caring. But there is a softer Trump vote than there was. There's an even softer, like non-existent enthusiasm for DeSantis and Haley.
Right. And Trump's victory speech, you've followed a lot of these speeches. It felt to me with having DeSantis come in second meant that there's never going to be a single candidate that Trump is running against until deep into the primaries. Even if you added up what Vivek and DeSantis and Haley got, it still would be less than 50%, and Trump would beat that fictional candidate. It sounded like to me that he started his general election campaign last night in that victory speech. Was that what was your sense of that?
Yeah, that's one thing. Not to argue with everyone in the media, but I like McKay Coppin's piece for The Atlantic. See that I can agree with somebody instead of being disagreeable. That said, hey, everybody, you should check out a Trump rally. He said go to one. I think it's okay if you just watch one on TV and see what he's saying, because he's lost his swerve from 2016 and 2020, but he's also just spends a long time rambling about stuff. He always did, but he'll just get into his problems and stuff that's not relevant to voters. Like the old idea that, yeah, you weren't listening, but Trump was talking about manufacturing and he was talking about the forgotten man. He does less of that now. It is much more about his personal problems. So that pivot, it took a while. I mean, I was watching the speech live to take notes on it, and he starts with a long list of thank yous. He's kind of promising cabinet jobs to people. He's suggesting that the Attorney General of Iowa, who endorsed him, should run for governor. And I was talking with
that's when CNN cut away after the first 5 minutes. We thought like this is like an Oscar speech. It's not even
right. Oh yeah, without a wrap 'em up button. But not to get into everything Trump said, but that's a great example. Cable went from you should witness this entire Trump thing to Trump started talking about how immigrants are bad. We're going to cut away. All right. Well, if the actual Trump content is not, even when he's on book, he's wasting a lot more time talking about his personal problems and things that are less inspiring to people. I don't think if you played a Biden speech, some of the times where he's losing focus and saying, anyway, I don't think people would say, I feel more confident about Biden. I do think if you played somebody an entire Trump speech, many would say, oh, that's what he's running on. Oh, okay. Unexpected. And I was mentioning the Attorney General because I was talking to the Democrat who might run for governor in 2026 in Iowa. And he was saying, that's interesting that he's on stage with and endorsing for governor this Attorney General who is kind of famous for taking contraception away from rape victims. Like he's not breaking away from the unpopular parts of the Republican Party. Anyone who wants in the tent will come in the tent. He's on record 1 billion times now saying unpopular things about abortion, or often incoherent things. But Democrats are pretty happy with the tape they're getting from all this stuff. Whereas in at this point in 2016, he was dunking on Jeb Bush in ways that a lot of Democrats thought was pretty fun. He has shaken up his message, even on book when Trump is delivering mostly the speech. He says, I do think in the rest of the media there's a effort to not an effort, but a tendency to cut out the stuff that's kind of rambling because it doesn't make good sound, as we say in the business, and focus. Well, he's on message here. Yeah, he's also off message. People might notice that how easily he starts talking about his grievances.
Let's talk about going forward. One of the numbers that really also stuck out to me was the number of people who thought the Iowa goers who thought that abortion was the most important issue, like 50% of them went for DeSantis. And I think it was 25% then Trump. And that to me suggests that Haley has no path. Like, she's going to go to New Hampshire, but everybody's going to write off New Hampshire because it's an open primary essentially. And it's like as Haley country as there can be. If she can't win in New Hampshire, it's hard to imagine she can win anywhere. So I don't think people are going to pay attention to that. DeSantis is going to go in. He's going to do those 2 debates if she does them, but that's it. They're going to spend the rest of their time maybe in South Carolina, but it's Nikki Haley's spot. But then the next couple of primaries is where DeSantis goes. And if he's getting the hardcore anti-abortion vote because he made some inroads in questioning Trump's abortion bona fides, and Trump was a little late in sort of embracing. That's going to be helpful for the Democrats, I would imagine, because Trump's going to have to raise the fact that he was responsible for appointing justices who got rid of abortion. But also it means that Nikki Haley has no sort of like path, it feels like to me, to become that primary candidate against him.
Yes, the abortion issue is pretty complicated, and I've been talking a lot, so uncomplicated. If you live in Iowa, you're an Iowa pro-lifer. What Trump did by appointing his Supreme Court justices made it possible for your state to effectively ban abortion. You have a 6-week ban. And maybe you can care a lot about whether California bans it too. And that's the Lindsey Graham position, the Tim Scott position. But it turns out you didn't care that much. I mean, you're not marching to the polls to vote against Donald Trump because he's not specific about the federal ban he'd do. And it just wasn't as much of an issue in Iowa, which is the place where that might have mattered. I mean, in New Hampshire, it is a more pro-choice state. Even Republicans generally are more pro-choice. I mean, the governor isn't, but the furthest they've done with complete control of the legislature is a 24-week abortion ban. I mean, 24 weeks, if that was in place in Texas, the Kate Cox, the woman who had to flee the state to get a medically necessary abortion, she was not at 24 weeks yet. So this is a more liberal state on social issues, not really fiscal issues, but social issues. And it's unique in the Republican primary. I mean, Vermont exists. All right, that's about it. There's not many places where you get a Republican electorate that's pretty pro-choice. So yeah, the problem for Haley is, what do? Best case scenario, you got an electorate that is aligned with you in New Hampshire. You win New Hampshire, and I think she would be a big story. The first Republican woman to win the primary, first non-white person to win the New Hampshire. There's a lot of stories you could tell about this. But then she runs into this brick wall in South Carolina, because that is not the South Carolina electorate. The South Carolina electorate, same thing. The abortion is banned effectively because of what Trump did. So if you're an abortion-focused voter, you're fine. If you want specifics, you've got DeSantis. If you don't want any of that stuff, well, you have Haley, but you can't lose your home state and continue. There's no way to do this. There is no way to spin. I still have a path to nomination after losing my home state by 30 points, not just because that's humiliating, but look at the next races. You have Michigan, where Trump is strong after South Carolina. You have Super Tuesday, where there's really, I mentioned Vermont, but everything else. I mean, look at the California electorate. That is a very right-wing MAGA electorate. It's not California hippies. That's the wrong way to view it. If you're a registered Republican in California, you can vote in that primary. You are MAGA at this point. So yeah, she doesn't really have anywhere to go. Would she have somewhere to go if she had a huge surge in Iowa and convinced a bunch of pro-lifers, et cetera, to vote for her? That's kind of like possibly, maybe in another universe, but we live in this universe. She didn't do it, so she just doesn't have enough of a coalition to compete with Trump after New Hampshire.
Is there? All right. So lastly, is there any? I mean, is there any sort of like, in the course of your reporting, are you picking up anything in terms of like the Democratic electorate, or is it just, I mean, there's like 3 states where there's not going to be a primary. It seems like, do you have a sense of like, as we look to the general, because I really do get the sense that like we are weeks away from everyone just looking to the general at this point.
Yeah, so national Democrats generally are their view of the result is there's a lot of voters. We were talking about this before who are like, another choice between Trump and Biden. I guess Trump, whatever, and they're not thinking about it. And they think what will happen is once Trump clearly is the nominee, he's going to be back in the center of things. And when he's in the center of things, he's less popular. And I mean, this is issue after issue throughout his presidency and throughout the last campaign. This was the case. If Trump was the focus of things, the things got less popular. The border wall, like abortion policy, foreign policy, everything. And he's also, like we were saying, more erratic and given to just going on weird tangents. One that they focused on last night is he starts talking about his wife attending Rosalind Carter's funeral and then says, oh, Jimmy Carter's the happiest person because just Biden makes him look good. That's a weird thing to say. So he was going to keep saying weird things. Democrats in New Hampshire, remember, the party descheduled the primary. You're not going to get delegates. Biden's not in the ballot. There's a write-in effort to convince people to just write in the president's name so that their Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson don't get any bragging rights or even any delegates. And so there are I talked to some today. There's Democrats who are trying to convince people come in and vote for Haley as a spoiler to slow down Trump and to give us a chance of not having to run against him. That's kind of where the local Democrats see this is, okay, Haley didn't do quite well enough where she's coming in with a ton of momentum, but we're still going to try, not all the Democrats, but these guys who work, Primary Pivot is the group. These people saying, all right, if you're a New Hampshire Democrat or unaffiliated voter who votes for Democrats, you have a shot, do this. Chris Christie was doing this before the registration deadline, urging Democrats to switch the registration, go independent or Republican, so you could vote for him to slow Trump down. That's how locally they're thinking about it. Nationally, the sense is, no, this is over. We need to get to the point where voters see Donald Trump, the 2024 version, in the news every day and realize they don't want him.
Interesting. All right, one last question, and this is about Capitol Hill. You touched on this a little bit the other day in your Semaphor newsletter. The Republicans are sort of one by one losing their majority in the House with resignations and whatnot. They don't seem. Also, it seems that Johnson now is like the whole strategy is going to be we're not going to pass any immigration bill whatsoever, even as much as the Democrats are sort of like compromising on it. Where does this leave it? Like, I mean, the Democrats sort of like this is sort of almost like it reminds me of when Obama tried to cut Social Security, and the Freedom Caucus back in 2010 wouldn't say yes, and so the Democrats couldn't come out and campaign they're going to cut Social Security because it was the Democrats who were willing to offer it. And yet, so this is what's going to happen when the Republicans just use immigration as a bludgeon on Biden, but Biden doesn't want to come out and actually defend immigrants in any way.
Oh, yes, so there's a few issues like this. This is the big one, though. I would say energy policy is the same, where the Biden administration's slowly moving towards a policy that might make that eliminate some of the political problems they see, except it doesn't because Republicans don't give them credit and Democrats don't like it. And this is one of them. The Republican approach, I hate using they, but I can say a common line you heard from Republicans, Kevin McCarthy would say this, is Democrats want the issue, they don't want a solution. They want the issue of immigration because they can use it against us and because yada yada, great replacement theory. Side note, that was probably the most memorable thing I saw in Iowa was Vivek Ramaswamy was late to an event and Steve King, who had endorsed him, just vamped by talking about the great replacement theory for 8 minutes. But that's how they talk about this and they really are, I think, running down the clock. The expectation from them is in a year and 4 days, Donald Trump is going to be president again. Why should we agree to anything until Donald Trump is president? Why would you take a deal with Joe Biden that you can throw out and say, all right, no deal whatsoever. You saw Stephen Miller, who expects to be back in a Trump administration, saying deportations begin at noon on Inauguration Day. So this is mitigating against any deal, is the sense that Republicans have that we can make this is a loser for Biden every day. That there's footage of people in New York, migrants living in hotels. We can talk about it. It came up a lot in the trail. I mean, immigration was a top issue in the exit poll, but also every candidate was saying, look at these reports of migrants living in schools in New York. The issue is just great for them. And one, they don't want any compromises that Biden would offer in terms of a path to citizenship. Every Republican in this race, even Nikki Haley, who we just started talking about trying to appeal to Democrats, their position is deport everybody who's here illegally. So if their starting position is deport everybody, and they think they're going to win the election, the cost to them is 11 plus months of people moving into crossing the border and getting asylum, who they can then deport. And
right.
Is that ideal? Well, no, but it seems like it mostly is making life hell for Eric Adams and for Brandon Johnson and for Karen Bass. So if you are in a cynical mind set, which I usually am, that's the incentives. What would be good for Republicans if there's a deal on immigration and border crossings decrease, asylum seekers decrease, and Biden says, look, I fixed a problem. Well, that's not good for them. And that's right. How I see this issue. I do see it as driven through the presidential campaign, but they're pretty clear on that. Just like if the worst things are for Biden, no matter what the human cost is, the better they are for us. Yeah.
And I imagine when you're dealing with the Republican electorate, it's people who are not as engaged in this as maybe you would if you were in a Democratic primaries. But is Biden's support, like complete unmitigated support for Israel, and what people are seeing in Gaza, are people talking about that in the Republican primary at all? Are you hearing stuff from like non-Republicans as you go around reporting?
No, it didn't really. The most that came up with Republicans is the Trump argument, which is if he was still president, Israel would be fine, never would have been attacked. And it just kind of folds into, they don't even praise Biden for doing things that they agree with. They say, yeah, but things are worse than they wouldn't have been if he wasn't there. And he does get I'm not saying he should get credit from Democrats. I'm saying he does, but he doesn't get any. I think he gets the DMFI, AIPAC, et cetera, Democrats who have worked to beat people they disagree with. They like his policy. They're not running ads against him, but you see in all the polling, younger voters don't like the way that Biden's handling this. And I've seen, not in Iowa, I've seen Genocide Joe tags, posters in bigger cities. I've seen. Yeah. I think it has become a problem. It's not in Iowa, but in polling of Michigan, it's clearly a problem. Voters under 35, and this is if you went to college, you didn't go to college, you're white, you're black, whatever. This is like very well known.
I think it's very much an age. Yeah. People under the age 40 to 35 is across the board. Yeah. It seems to me there's just a much more sensitivity to it. You've only known Netanyahu as, like, for the most part, you've only known Israel as Benjamin Netanyahu's Israel. You've only known it as a country that is perfectly safe. Yes, there are attacks, but a country that is able to defend most attacks and effectively counterattack, destroy anyone who has attacked it, as it's done in Palestine right now. It is not. If you're a boomer, you remember Golda Meir, you remember the country almost being destroyed. That's not how young people view Israel. Not to get into a whole tangent, I have not seen a place where that would play out for Biden. Now, in New Hampshire, there are Palestinian Americans who live here, Lebanese Americans who live in the state. There is some opposition, but it's really only in Minnesota, Georgia, and Michigan where this is significant. And when you ask Democrats about it, I asked the governor of Minnesota about that a few weeks ago. They just think, yes, we'll get to a point where Trump is the alternative. And if young people see the Trump-Biden choice, at best, they will vote for Biden reluctantly. At worst, they're going to stay home or vote for Cornel West. And they're just not really processing, okay, we need to change direction
because we're going to lose votes on this. Not so far what I've seen.
Dave Weigel, always a pleasure to talk to you. Honestly, having followed your reporting for at least a decade now, I think nobody has a sense of what's happening out there like you do. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for letting me go on and try to explain it. I tried
really great.
all my rambles to have facts in them.
No,
so thank you.
Really great. Enjoy all your travails across New Hampshire today.
Yes. We're in a snowing, but it's not sub-zero, so I can handle this. Yeah.
All right, great. Well, I hope to talk to you again soon. Thanks again, Dave Weigel, and we'll put a link to your page at Semaphor, folks. Yeah. A great way to get a sense of what's going on out there. Thanks again.